We're live.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell from CARE National, welcoming you to today's episode of the Daily Dose. Today, as you all know, is June 19th, and that is the topic of our program today. Many of us, just a few weeks ago, many Americans did not even know what Juneteenth was or that Juneteenth existed. But in light of the tragic racist incidents that have occurred, police violence in recent days, and society's focus on combating anti-Black racism, there's thankfully been a renewed focus on this part of this often overlooked part of American history. So today, inshallah, we want to recognize and educate ourselves and our viewers and the public about Juneteenth. And I'm so happy that we're going to do that today by, number one, showing you a short film that CARE filmed a few years ago when we visited numerous civil rights sites in the state of Alabama. We filmed a short documentary, which you're going to watch today, inshallah. And here to comment on Juneteenth and that documentary, the lessons we learned about racism, are two special guests, Brother Mustafa Carroll, who is the former executive director of CARE Houston and a current board member with CARE Houston, and Brother Abdul Mubarak Rowe, who is the communications director with CARE New Jersey. Assalamu alaikum, gentlemen. How are both of you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
Alaikum salam. Can you hear me?
Here.
Yes. Good to see both of you, mashallah. It's alhamdulillah, so happy to connect with you. So on this day, Juneteenth, we want to watch the program, that documentary, which is it's inspiring, it's heartbreaking, it's disturbing. I remember looking at the look on your faces as we went through those sites, and the emotional impact it had on you. And we want to talk about that documentary and how it's relevant to what's going on in our country today. But first, for those people who are not aware of Juneteenth, the history of it, the benefits of it, can I ask you both just to share a little bit of your perspective on the holiday, what it means to you, what it means to the Black community, and if your family did anything to mark it growing up. A lot of African Americans, we don't do anything, and some do. Maybe tell us a bit about your personal experience with the holiday. Brother Mustafa, you want to start us off?
Okay. Yeah, well, it has some real significance for me after I moved to Texas, because it wasn't known in other parts of the country back in the late 70s and early 80s. It got more popularized over time, but it's actually began as a Texas holidays per se, because African Americans, after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and even after the 13th Amendment in January of 1865, they got word in Galveston that they had been freed for 2 years. And so therefore they didn't know which teenth it was it 13th, 14th, or 19th. And so they said it was Juneteenth. So it's one of those days. For me, I have my family history kind of keeps me in line with what goes on, because my maternal grandfather was born in 1865, 10 months after the 13th Amendment. And he died in 1966, which was 101 years later, 2 years after the Civil Rights Act of 64 and a year after the Voting Rights Act of 65. So, I heard a lot about the history from him and from my family members. We have a lot of elders in our family. And he had moved to the North to escape some of the challenges, per se, of the South. And he brought all 14 of his kids and settled in East Chicago back in the early 1900s. And so there's a lot of history there, and it's not a long history. I think, when we look at it in terms of time itself, it's, you're talking about my grandparents. So my great grandparents were actually enslaved. Yeah. So it's not as long as we think it was. And I think that sometimes when people look at Juneteenth and civil rights and slavery and Jim Crow and all that, they think about it in terms of, it's ancient history. Well, it's not really that ancient.
Right. We're not talking about ancient Rome here. We're talking about America, decades ago.
Yeah, just decades.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Jazakallah khair, Brother Mustafa.
Yeah.
Brother Abdul, your thoughts on the holiday. What do you want people to know about the holiday? Any personal experiences you've had with it with your family?
Well, yeah, I was always aware of Juneteenth. I'm from Virginia, and my great-great-grandparents were slaves. However, I didn't really become to appreciate Juneteenth until I moved to Houston, Texas in 1975. And when I was a young cameraman for CBS affiliate in Houston, Texas, KHOU, we observed Juneteenth through the entire week. And I covered a lot of events during that time in Houston and began to learn a whole lot. I talked to a lot of the elders of whose grandparents and parents were slaves, and talked about all of the efforts that they utilized to establish themselves as free men and women. And so along with that, they have the Juneteenth Blues Festivals, which was a huge event in Houston at that time. And it was extraordinarily educational. It was a pleasure for me to be a part of that. And as a journalist, as a young budding journalist, that was beginning the earliest parts of my TV career as a young video journalist. I got to learn a lot about just listening to the elders and them explaining to me exactly what Juneteenth represented. And these were people whose parents and grandparents and even great-grandparents were slaves, and the stories were very fresh in their minds. And so it was quite an experience for me.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just remarkable to think your great-great-grandparents were the most of us, great-grandparents. It's, it's scary to think about. I mean, mashallah, as a young boy, I knew my great-grandparents, and obviously they weren't slaves. I'm a bit younger than you, but they were just a generation or so away. And so this is, again, this is very present and prescient. Now, as we all know, many white Americans and many major corporations are now today celebrating Juneteenth. A year ago, not a peep. And so obviously, what we've seen in recent weeks, the incidents of anti-Black racism that we've seen, police violence, have inspired people to become much more aware and conscious about the issue of racism, and inspired people to look for ways to express solidarity with the Black community. So let me ask you this. Are you all happy to see corporations and politicians, celebrating Juneteenth? Do you feel skeptical about it? Like, do you get skeptical whenever you see a major corporation embracing something that the community is doing? What are your thoughts, honestly? What do you feel about the kind of sudden, widespread embrace of Juneteenth? Go ahead, Brother Muslim first. Go ahead, you, Brother Abdul, since you already started, then Brother Muslim.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so since you did ask me, now remember, you did ask me, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Frankly, I'm not impressed.
Yeah.
I've seen this type of posturing and pandering before. I see nothing as more than a corporate sales pitch money grab, quite frankly. Forgive my cynicism, but history has taught me otherwise. And so unless I see some real tangible results, coming from these corporations with respect to addressing the systemic racism and white supremacy that exists in these corporations, I'm not fully impressed. I'm not impressed with the whole entertainment that takes away from the real reality of the whole issue of white supremacy and systemic racism that exists as we speak, even within these same corporations that purport themselves to promote, this Juneteenth awareness and what have you. So I don't want to, at the risk of throwing cold water on it, no, I'm not impressed with it at all.
That's cool. We want to keep it real. This is what this is what CARE is supposed to do. This is what the show is supposed to do. So let's keep it real. Brother Mustafa, your thoughts?
I echo my brother's sentiments. I mean, we've been through this dance before. I consider it just window dressing. At this point in time, I've seen all the diversity training and all this type of stuff. And to me, the issues that we're facing are not as deep as people tend to make it. I want our people to stop being killed by police. As simple as that. I don't care if you like us, don't like us, etc. I think until we see something substantive, that we shouldn't get too excited because corporations or even politicians engage us. And when they come up with serious legislation or serious policies that hold people totally accountable, like they would me if I did what happened then I'll start to my eyebrows will lift. But until then, this doesn't excite me at all. Seen it too many times.
Yeah. Also, in addition to that, it includes all this taking a knee and wearing the kente cloth and all that. Really, it insults my, symbolism does not save my life. Symbolism does not put money in my pocket. Symbolism does not feed my children. Symbolism does not take that foot or that knee off my neck. Okay. So until you submiss me with all that symbolism and all the other stuff that they use to insult our intelligence with. Now, there are some Black people, let's just be clear. There are some Black people who also engage in this sort of pandering, and so forth, to sort of lull the masses to sleep, if you will, at the behest of the master, right? So I am not impressed, not at all, not with none of it, because really it insults our intelligence by and large.
So I think, it seems the message here is that, if you want to really express solidarity with the Black community in this time, right, it's not enough just to say, I'm celebrating Juneteenth, right? If you are not doing that in companionship with taking actual steps to change the way your corporation does business, the way your political organization, your political party does business, the way you legislate, right? Then it's just as you all said, empty.
A PR stunt.
Yeah, exactly. So Hamza, so we're happy that people are getting more educated about Juneteenth. I think we're all happy about that. But I think we also want to see some action. So as you all may know, one of the things that CARE has been doing over the past few weeks in response to this, the most recent spate of police shootings of unarmed Black men and women, we established a task force. And this task force was meant to identify concrete things that CARE and the Muslim community could do to try to impact, to try to address the issue of anti-Black racism, especially in the criminal justice system. Yeah, we put out a statement condemning what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, but we want to do more than condemn things. We want to actually figure out things we can do. And so I'm going to show you, gentlemen, what you may have already seen. This is the first policy statement, plan of action that CARE has put out, laying out our immediate goals for combating racist police violence in America. So this task force, we produced this report, and this lays out what our goals as CARE are going to be. What are the actual policies we're going to be fighting for in the weeks and months and years ahead at the state, federal, and local level? Everything from reducing police budgets and reinvesting that money into community resources, to banning the militarization of police officers, to ending foreign police training with human rights violators, to cracking down on racial profiling, to getting police out of schools where so many kids are having their first negative interaction with law enforcement, especially people of color. So many different things that the team has thought up, great ideas that we have identified that have been championed by Black community leaders inside and outside of CARE, inside and outside the Muslim community. And we're very happy we'll have a chance to champion those ideas, inshallah, going forward. But I mention that because a lot of what we're laying out, this whole idea of radically transforming the way that we police, ending racist police violence, it might seem like a tall order. It might seem like it's impossible to achieve in our lifetimes. But I think what we learned on that documentary trip, on that visit to Alabama, is that things can change. As bad as things seem right now, things can, inshallah, get better. We don't have to be hopeless or cynical about the state of affairs. Inshallah, we can change things. And so that's why part of the reason we want to show the documentary now is to show how things used to be in America. Some things are still the same. Some things are still horrible, right? But this documentary, what we saw in Alabama, is how horrible things used to be and how things have gotten better because people said, we're not going to be hopeless. We're not going to be cynical. We believe things can change in America, and we're going to fight to change things in America. And they succeeded in changing many, many things. And there is work left to be done that, inshallah, we are doing and trying to do today. But anyway, let's watch the documentary. Let's go through that memory lane trip, and then we'll come back together, three of us, to talk about what lessons we can learn from that documentary and what lessons we can apply to our current fight against anti-Black racism as it manifests itself in policing, healthcare, education, et cetera, inshallah. Sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
All right, Ian, let's go ahead and broadcast the documentary, and then we'll be back on to discuss it right after it finishes, inshallah.
was born and raised in the South, in Virginia, and I lived in the Deep South for a good part of my life. And so this is a very solemn and very important event in my life to go back to ground zero. You read about it, you've seen it on television, you've seen film footage. To go back to where it actually existed in person is extraordinarily traumatic and extraordinarily personal. But for my soul, this is good for me. And I hope and pray Allah that everybody, each and every person here, takes a bit of that with them to never, ever, ever forget.
Ya Allah, please have us have a safe journey as we are here in these days, recognizing the struggles of the African American people. Ya Rabbil Alameen, please guard and secure and keep peaceful the hearts of those who are suffering trauma. Ya Allah, please have mercy upon our pious Muslim ancestors who gave their lives and shed their blood here on this land, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Subhan rabbika bi'izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
It's very important for us to understand that the United States of America was built by African Americans, but not for African Americans.
The reason why you sit on this bus today, that you can sit on this bus and you can take this pilgrimage, is because somebody sacrificed for you to be able to take this pilgrimage. You have the privilege and honor of walking in their footsteps without the same risks to your safety. So I am grateful to be on this journey with you and those at CARE who take a lot of risks on behalf of our community.
I think Muslims take a lot for granted. They inherited the benefits of the civil rights movement. So they need to learn what that meant and how it's playing out today. And then understand that, you know, these people stood up when it was hard to stand up.
Birmingham, Selma, Montgomery, that's hallowed ground, historically hallowed ground.
Welcome to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute.
I need you to think for one moment, what must it be like to be untouchable all day long? There were even laws that said that you couldn't look a person in their eye. It's a crime called eyeballing. In Alabama in 1900, we craft a constitution that is infamous as the longest constitution in the world. The United States Constitution has 27 amendments. Alabama's Constitution has over 860. On this wall, I have my victim who is reading these segregation ordinances, and since she's doing so, I'm going to get her to read them out loud so that everybody can hear them.
It shall be unlawful to conduct a restaurant or other place for the serving of food in the city, at which white and colored people are served in the same room, unless such white and colored persons are effectually separated by a solid partition extending from the floor upward to a distance of 7 feet or higher, and unless a separate entrance from the street is provided for each compartment.
You know, I grew up and lived through a lot of this stuff, and I know pretty much have seen all of it, all the major events.
Our history books don't tell the whole story. And my mother used to say, half the truth is a whole lie. Now, as we look at these two classrooms, the boards are very different. The floor is different. The books here would not go over there until this classroom was done with those books. They were all worn out. Some of them, sometimes the information's outdated. And let's just be honest. Some people would write things in these books because they knew where these books were going. some teachers would have what they call erase day, where you'd open your book and you had to go through it looking for ugly messages that had been left by the kids that had the books before. There was no 11th grade and a 12th grade for a person of color because you were heading to that mine. If you were female, you were heading to somebody's kitchen, or you were heading to their home to take care of their children and take care of their family. Our mission statement at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is to take the lessons of the civil rights and human rights movements from the past in our present to try to chart a better future. At what had to be the lowest point of the American Civil Rights Movement, Dr. Martin Luther King was urging people to continue. And that's what a leader does. A leader takes you at your lowest point, picks you up, and reminds you why you started whatever it is in the first place.
All in favor, let it be known by standing on your feet.
All black people ever got from Congress was debate. All they ever got from the president was rhetoric.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
On Good Friday, Martin Luther King is going to be arrested. Bull Connor puts him in isolation, does not allow him access to the outside world. This was to shake Birmingham in their faith in Dr. King. And so he can't let that go without a response. And so he pens the letter from a Birmingham jail. These bars and that stool are the exact bars that Dr. King was locked behind when he wrote that letter.
To understand the deep sense of dedication and determination that those people went through, they paid for the freedoms of African Americans with their very blood.
Voltaire said the following. He said, if you could lead people to believe in absurdity, then you could lead people to commit atrocities.
That information hit me again today. I mean, I saw this stuff as a child. I was a teenager when Dr. King was killed. You know, sometimes I feel like we get lost in the work. We don't really understand what civil rights mean. These people weren't looking at things like how much money they had. Dr. King died poor. Malcolm died poor and young, both of them, with small children. That's what I mean by sacrifices. They knew.
First Congregational is the only church in Birmingham, Alabama that had an interracial congregation. It was illegal for people of color and white people to worship together. But when we look at these churches, most notable is 16th Street Baptist Church. Was known as everybody's church because it was the largest facility in the black community in Birmingham. The first four-year high school for black students was born in that church. The graduations were held in that church. The first black bank in Birmingham was created in that church.
And the name of the church when it was first organized was not 16th Street Baptist Church. The name of the church was the First Colored Church of Birmingham. All of these windows on this side of the church were destroyed except the one in the center here, the window of Christ. That window was damaged. The face of Christ was blown out of that window. So the bomb goes off, it blows the side of the church into the girls' bathroom. And 4 of the 5 girls that were in the bathroom were killed. 1 survived. The survivor's name was Sarah Collins, is Sarah Collins, because she's still alive today. She's 66 years old. She lost one of her eyes in the blast. Her sister, Addie Mae Collins, was one of the 4 girls that was killed. The other 3 young ladies that was killed was Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, and Carol Robinson.
They did not die in vain. God still has a way of wringing good out of evil. History has proven over and over again that unmerited suffering is redemptive.
I was on my way to church when that happened. We haven't changed that much. We've made some progress, but we haven't really changed like we think we have. You know, a lot of this stuff was institutionalized. I don't think people really knew. There are many folks who didn't know that this was the law. Segregation was the law, just like immigration laws that we have now that are unfair.
it's unspeakable. It's very hard to talk about it. It's very hard to articulate, what happened here. And it wasn't that long ago either. And that's what is so frightening about it.
To be honest with you, I don't know what my family was doing during the civil rights movement. And I think that would go to say that they were being complicit.
Mass incarceration, unjust police shootings, the struggle has continued just in a very different way.
That is absolute devil. Devil!
I know.
Never
like if I had
never, ever forgive. I shall never forgive. Never forgive. Never forgive.
No matter what happens to us, there will be nothing near what has happened to African Americans hundreds of years ago and what continues to happen until today. People are in denial, and some people even don't believe that what happened has happened, and African Americans should forget about it. They cannot forget about it, and we have to recognize what happened for so many years and pledge our organization to be true fighters for justice. This is the place where they were confronted by the police, who were ready to kill them, to beat them, and stop the action and stop the march. And today we are walking free of fear, but the struggle continues for their people and for us and for all humanity.
So when these folks decided to go over that bridge, they already knew that on the other side of the bridge there was going to be potential violence, and they knew that some of them were going to lose their lives. But they went anyway. And one of the things that I always say to our Muslim community, and a lot of those people, if not all of those people, we forget in the civil rights movement at the time, were people of faith. They believed in God.
The Evans Pettus Bridge, the Bloody Sunday. You see the pictures, you see the video. It affects you in a certain way, but not like when you are there and you're seeing the history of it unfold.
This whole thing about civil rights is based on the faith. What happened here in this state and other states was legal. It was legal. Segregation was legal. These people were breaking the law. And this is the real struggle. The real struggle is not what they're doing. The real struggle is how we are responding to it. People claiming to be Christians were beating up on other Christians. That's the struggle. It's the psychological effect.
We saw the memorials there, the graves. It was a gloomy weather, gloomy mood, somber mood. So nature was very compatible to my sentiments yesterday.
People would be in church worshiping and come out and look for somebody to lynch as part of the afternoon entertainment. This wasn't just, are they mad because you did something? This is just entertainment. And people would have their families there. And today we got PG ratings on television, and at that time, they would allow their child to see a man being hung, quartered, lynched, burned alive, etc. People are not afraid of Muslims because of terrorism, because no terrorism could have been any worse than what we experience here in this country. People are afraid of Muslims because they're on a trajectory to be prominent in this country, and nothing frees these people but faith.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, O mankind, we have created you from a single male and female and made you into nations and tribes so that you know one another. And we have been hearing horrifying stories about what humanity did to itself when it failed the basic test of knowing one another and appreciating one another. Muslims who live in Alabama, you're surrounded by legacy of oppression. What went wrong could go wrong again. What's the difference? We were not there hundreds of years ago. The thing is, we are here today.
I use Islamophobia as a bridge to the civil rights movement in my presentation, just to kind of put people in a space and time. The African American churches were firebombed regularly during the civil rights movement, and not to say that African American churches are not still targeted, they are. But now we have the mosque that was firebombed in Florida. Mosques can't even be built. Communities can't even get a permit before they're being terrorized. And so the way I see Muslim community members targeted is the same way I see African American community members continue to be targeted. Some students came up to Morris and said, who are these other people you're talking about? We recognize Dr. King, but who's Medgar Evers? Who's Emmett Till? Already these names were lost to history. So we erected the memorial as a way to educate young people and adults.
The thing that gets you is to think about the sacrifices that those people made, and absolutely facing death almost every day if they didn't toe the line that they were supposed to toe.
Michael Donald was a 19-year-old black man that was abducted by two men who belonged to a group called the United Klans of America. 1981. Abducted in Mobile, Alabama. They took him to a remote location, cut his throat, then brought him back to a neighborhood and hung him from a tree. This is often referred to as the last lynching.
It's still going on. I mean, I've been around a minute, and we're still having police brutality and murder. The difference is the technology that we have now. We didn't have that technology in the past, but they were able to utilize television effectively. But still, you're seeing absolute issues that people are filming and putting on Facebook, and Twitter, Instagram, etc.
In 1954 with Brown v. Board, which is said to mark the beginning of the modern American civil rights movement, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that segregated schools were unconstitutional, overturning Plessy v. Ferguson that said that segregated schools were just fine. And it was that really inspired people to kind of start demonstrating and demanding change in their own communities. And then we start here with a plaque to each of we call them martyrs to the movement. I really appreciate being able to see their faces, and it simply states their name, date, and place of death. And certainly they were more than that. They were stories, they were people. We can see that some were children, some were young, some didn't even have a picture. John Reese was 15 years old and he was killed in 1955, and his family did not have a picture of him before he was taken.
We walked through the display and entered into the Hall of Martyrs. And that was overwhelming.
The area where we're going to in Montgomery was actually one of the most prolific slave markets in the Americas.
National Memorial for Peace and Justice will open to the public April 26. It contains 805 steel markers, one for each county where lynchings took place.
So you start with them at eye level, and then on this quarter, they begin to rise.
Montgomery is the place where people stood up to fight against segregation. And they were confronted with dogs and with police officers with batons and fire hoses, and they were brutalized and jailed, and some were killed, and yet they kept fighting. Following enslavement, we had decades of terrorism and violence, and people don't realize that the demographic geography of this nation was shaped by this terrorism. The black people in Cleveland and Chicago and Newark and Detroit and Los Angeles and Oakland did not go to those communities as immigrants. They went to those communities as refugees and exiles from terror. And in this new America, we're going to create something, I hope, that feels more like justice and equality and fairness. But we have to understand the kind of America we have created to understand the kind of America we need to create. I'm proud that CARE came to be a part of this celebration of these new institutions. And I look forward to the partnerships that we create, that we sustain by holding one another, supporting one another, loving one another in that struggle for justice. So I want to thank everybody at CARE for being a part of this moment, of this history, of this journey.
I don't know if the wounds ever close, but it's like reopening wounds.
I'm not the same person that I was when I came down here.
This was a life-changing journey, which everyone must take at least once in their lifetime, as we continue to struggle together for justice and equality for all.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. All right, that was the documentary. Again, that was filmed just a few years ago in Birmingham and Selma, Alabama. CARE staffers from around the country uniting to go on that civil rights tour to see firsthand some of the history of the brutality of racism and also the fight against racism that was in so many ways successful, thank God, alhamdulillah. And so we, again, wanted to watch the documentary because it's very relevant to what is going on today, obviously. It shows that, yes, we have made great progress in America, but there is still much progress left to be made. Let's bring back on our special guest, Brother Mustafa Carroll, who's the former executive director and current board member with CARE Houston, and Brother Abdul Mubarak Rowe, communications director of CARE New Jersey, both of whom were on that journey with us in Alabama a few years ago. So gentlemen, you know, I was with you during the trip. You know, I think it honestly, watching you, it seemed like it, you know, it impacted you, you know, in a way that you didn't expect. I mean, because, you know, you were alive, you know, during the civil rights movement, you were familiar and had seen some of these things and heard the stories, but it still seemed to really deeply impact you in a way that I think surprised you. Maybe tell me if I'm wrong. Brother Mustafa, tell me about that. Just your thoughts on the journey. We'll talk in a minute about what's relevant to today, but just, you know, your thoughts as you look back on that journey 2 years later, you know, what do you take from it now?
Well, you know, and you're exactly correct. I was shocked at my response. I mean, you know, because I had seen much of this. I knew about Alabama. My folks are from Alabama. My mother's family, they're from Russell County. And you know, we knew about the history. We knew about Jim Crow. You know, all of this stuff. And I went along on the journey thinking I really didn't need to go because I had already seen it. And when I got there, I think the thing that impacted me the most was hearing the indignities that our people had to deal with every day. You know, I think that even affected me more than seeing some of the lynching stuff, that every day they had to, simple things like couldn't be in the same room, couldn't play tiddlywinks or checkers, couldn't look somebody in the eye. All those things, not only they were according to the law, and you could get hurt or killed by that, by not doing it. So it was just, you know, my gut reaction, I guess it was real visceral when I heard all of that stuff again and sat there and listened to it. It just struck me all of a sudden. I don't know why. I can't even explain it now, why I felt like I did when it happened, because I wasn't shocked. This wasn't my first time seeing it, you know, and it just, I think, just brought back some memories. Yeah. And it was just tough.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Brother Abdul?
Kind of like what Brother Mustafa said, I had sort of tried to brace myself before I went to see it, because growing up, you know, you saw a lot of this in your living room every evening on the 6 o'clock evening news, and so none of this was lost on me. We talked about it in our classrooms because growing up in the South, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, so we saw this every day, talked about it every day. We didn't deal with it with the level of intensity in Virginia as they dealt with it down in the Deep South. So I thought, at least anyway, that I had prepared myself mentally and emotionally to deal with it. However, when I got there, and I think the tipping point for me was when we walked through the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, and coming out of that museum, when you saw me sitting down, you know, just in an extraordinary rage, basking between rage and deep sorrow. At one time I was in tears, and the other times I could have, if I even so much as saw someone of a Caucasian hue, I would go in and choke them. Because I was between the ages of, simply between the point of unbridled righteous rage.
And I remember that moment where you were after seeing, you were just angry. Yes.
I was justifiably angry. And when I came home that night, the first thing I did when I got home was cry in my wife's arms, because it just all came up, and it stayed with me for a long, 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 long time. And it just let me know just the depth of subhuman depravity, of these people, who these so-called these white people. It just let me know. I mean, I knew they were savage, but seeing it on this was hallowed ground, man. Seeing it, and it just was a very visceral, appreciation for what they were like Brother Mustafa said, what they went through every single day of their lives. Yeah. And then I began to understand the history of it with respect to the fact that there were some Black folk. Okay, I saw this documentary called "The Spies of Mississippi," and what that was sharing to me also, but there were also Black people who were complicit in the lynchings and murders of some of our noted civil rights personalities, including Emmett Till, yes, and Medgar Evers, yes. So all of that has to be taken into as well.
And so I think, as we think back to that documentary, that experience, what you all were reminded of, and maybe even saw for the first time, yourselves in such a graphic way, is that so much of the violence that was perpetrated by racists, white Americans who are racist, was done under the color of law, with the permission of the legal system, and often with the active participation of police officers of the time. Right? Bull Connor is just the most famous and prominent of them, but this was common, that you could have the police either arrest a Black person for activism or allegedly whistling in the wrong direction. And then if you don't get killed by the police yourself, the police might let you go, but they've tipped off the lynch mob to when you're going to be free, and they come and take care of you. And then, no one's charged with the crime, or you get an all-white jury and you walk away. So the criminal justice system was a key way that racial terror was perpetrated against Black people for generations. And now that is why many people say now, as we see incidents of racist police violence directed disproportionately at Black men and women, that the problem still exists, just in maybe a different form. And perhaps we are just seeing it in different ways, thanks to the advent of cell phone cameras. So let me ask you about this, start with you, Brother Mustafa, is what do you think from that trip, from the civil rights movement in general, what is relevant and applicable to us today? What lessons should we be learning from that documentary, from the civil rights movement, and applying them to the issue of police violence, police reform, criminal justice, the issues that are still lingering today?
Well, one of the things I'm always saying that we should understand our history so we don't continue to make the same mistakes. I'm a little bit cynical in the sense that I think that a lot of the mistakes, if you want to call them that, are being made, are being done on purpose. I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's because they don't understand Black people. I think what has happened in this society that happened way back and continues to happen is that we've had so much defamation against Black folks, that there are so many stereotypes about how we don't work, and we're lazy, and we're criminal, and we're this. By the time that information gets to in the general public, there's no sympathy or empathy for those types of folks, as it were. So I think what we can see is, if we go all the way back and talk about why police departments and the sheriff's departments were organized in the first place, was to catch runaway slaves. And then it just kept evolving. And then under color of law, they made other laws. And now you'll hear people bragging about, in some cases, how they're just not following the law, or they didn't do what they were supposed to do, so they should have been killed. So there's some justification that we see historically for killing Black folks, which exists today. Now, this is not the 1950s or the 40s or what have you, but what we can do is glean information from the past to understand the underpinnings of why things are happening like they are now, that people have always used the law against us. That, you know, I was looking at, there are several documentaries you can get, especially Ghosts of Mississippi, or the Philadelphia, Mississippi issue, where the police and the Klan were one and the same, even in the FBI. And all those law enforcement agencies, they had a lot of these extremist groups and persons in those agencies by design, in many cases, that they were there for the purpose of what they do. And so now that, you know, we are still struggling with these issues. So, you know, the one thing that I tell people, and I'm going to stop, you know, right here. The one thing I like, because people think, well, the Black community is soft on crime. Well, no, they're not soft on crime. But what happened historically is that it didn't matter whether you were good, bad, whether you worked or didn't work or what have you, everybody was treated the same. And when that happened, the community center kind of went into itself and stopped cooperating with the police. You're going to see that happen now because of this police brutality. It's even worse because a lot of the new folks don't even know the history and don't have a real connection. So they're going to be going through the same things that we went through years and years ago.
It also must be important to know that this wasn't just in the police agencies and law enforcement agencies. This was the courthouse. This was the city hall. This was state government. This was the churches. This was businesses. This was the schools, okay? You've seen those postcards when they would get out of church on Sunday afternoon and go out and find some young Black man or some young Black woman or some young Black child and hang them, butcher them, burn them, use a postcard and parade it all over the place, all over the country. So this was not just confined to law enforcement, if you will. Oh no, this was systemic throughout churches, law enforcement, politics, government, education, in people's homes and houses. The White Citizens Council, okay, in Mississippi, the White Citizens Council, they were comprised of some of the most prominent business leaders in Mississippi.
Yeah, and the man who killed Edgar Evers was a member of a White Citizens Council, Byron Dale.
Precisely, and education. Education. So it was all over. It wasn't just confined to any one place. The whole system was rotten. The whole system was corrupt. The whole system was devilish. Every one of them. And they're all guilty. And they all share in the guilt and the crime.
So what do you think, Brother Abdul, as you look at the situation now, right, where things have changed, we're still dealing with the issue of anti-Black racism, but maybe manifesting in different ways, and you got people on the streets protesting. You got white people, Black people, Hispanic people united, right, in this diverse coalition saying enough is enough. You got some people saying we've got to radically transform policing in America. Some people saying we've got to end policing in America. We got to do something different. You know, obviously CARE, you know, has a position, but I just want to hear from you personally as a Black man, your personal opinion, your personal experience. What do you hope comes out of this? Like, what does change look like to you? What needs to happen so that there are no more George Floyds, there are no more Breonna Taylors, there are no more Rayshard Brooks? What do you want to see happen?
There's so many places we could go with this. The first thing I want to see is I want to see us as Black people become to set our priorities straight. In other words, I want to see our institutions enforced, strengthened. I want to see the institution of the family enforced. I want us to see having some more pride and dignity and self-respect for ourselves. That way you begin to defend yourself against these people. Because recognize this too, as much as we talk about, you know, the Klan and other terrorist activities that was going on there was a Black organization called the Deacons for Defense. These were Black men, church-going Black men who took up to defend the Black churches and other Black communities and other Black organizations from the terror of the Ku Klux Klan all throughout the South. You have a God-given right to defend yourself, okay? it doesn't, it is, you have, and begin to engage on every level for tangibles, okay? And stop all with this insidious symbolism nonsense. You know, we want to see these cops and people go to jail. We want them to get prison time. We want them to get the death penalty. That's what we should be arguing for, okay? That's what we should be striving for. We want punishment for these crimes, not just some walk off and just be fired, you know, from your police department. No, we want punishment. We want you to get first-degree murder punishment, first-degree murder, death penalty, okay, and not to be satisfied with just being fired from the job. Also, we want to enact. I think we already really even have the police departments and law enforcement agencies are strengthened by various laws on the books right now, which prevent them gives them immunity.
Qualified immunity, often
immunity laws. Okay, those laws have to be challenged. Yeah. So we've got to fight on all kinds of fronts, and everybody has their own specialty. You know, CARE has its specialty. Okay, but it's not just up to CARE to do it. We can inspire others to get engaged. Okay, play your position. Everybody has a place of a strength where they want to operate into, and I say play that. For some, it may be education. For some, it may be in politics. For some, it may be in improving the engagement in law enforcement. For some, it may be strengthening the institutions within the home. Okay, everybody has a role to play. My concern is what we as Black folk do, okay, and those people of good conscience do amongst ourselves. Because when you find the population, and I'm impressed, let me just say right off the top that I'm impressed when I see these young white kids, Hispanic kids, and other Muslim immigrant young people finally waking up and seeing what's going on. That's a good start. Okay, that's a good start. But what happens all the time is that we as Americans by and large have a short attention span. And when the next flavor of the month comes along, we forget that because we've done it before. So what we're looking for is a sustained attention and process to eradicate these systems of white supremacy and oppression that exist in this country. And we understand the fact that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Because the lessons from the past have shown us that these people didn't give up. You know, they didn't give up. All they did was restructure, you know, their systems and kept moving on with it. Many of us sort of gave it up and thought we had quote unquote arrived until the reality came many years later and said, well, we're not as far ahead as we thought we were. So we have to be sustaining, okay? And be patient and persevere in the long haul, because I said it again, this is a marathon, beloved, not a sprint. And just as intent as they are on maintaining the systems of white supremacy, we have to be just as intent as we are on dismantling it in all of its forms.
Thank you, Brother Abdul. Jazakallah khair. Brother Mustafa, how about you? Your thought, and again, I'm asking for your thoughts. CARE has its position. And by the way, CARE, as you all may know, we oppose the death penalty because it is unfairly applied in America. But I want to hear what you all think personally, because that's what we want to hear from is your authentic view. So CARE has its view. We just want to hear what you think. So Mustafa, tell us what you think. Honestly, what do you want to, maybe not to, you and I know you, Brother Mustafa, maybe not too honest. Don't be too honest with us, but within limits, tell us what you want to come up with this. What do you want to see, inshallah? I had to temper myself.
I don't know how to do this. Well, I echo Brother Abdul's sentiments. The one thing that I'd like for people to understand when we talk about dismantling racism is not really the thing. Racism is like the vehicle that gets you to a place. And the reason that people do things is because they get rewarded. The reason that slavery existed for as long as it did was because it was an economic benefit. And when that economic benefit was threatened, they went to war. The reason that you had a lot of riots in the early 1900s was because the Black folks moving to the north were threatening in the industrial era. They were threatening getting into wartime industry, and people were worried you're going to take, quote unquote, our jobs. So underneath all of this is economics, power, etc. That the reason for a lot of this, the reason that blacks were only considered 3/5 of a human was for purposes of voting. So that in counties that had the majority black folks could never outvote their white counterparts. So, you know, what I would like to see us to mature a little bit, we have to take care of what we have to take care of. We can't, you know, I believe in, you know, that we need to rethink our families, rethink what's going on with our children, et cetera. Now, the only reason I don't like to talk about it too much is because, you know, we get beat up by, on the other side of this, people always saying, well, if you train your kids, they wouldn't get killed. If they learn how to obey the police, this wouldn't happen. If they did that, they blame the victim, so to speak. And they usually do it after they've killed them. So I'm kind of leery about even talking about it. And I know we can't, you know, talk about it in some circles, but we do have to acknowledge that there's some issue, whether or not that's not the reason for somebody shooting somebody once they've been subdued. I also feel like we got to get more politically active, like not just vote, but we need to take a lesson from the other side. When they don't like something, they go to their representatives. And these people are not any more intelligent. They're just active. They know what to do. They know how to do it. They put pressure on politicians. That's why you have so many of them supporting the current administration. There's a pressure there to keep these folks to supporting them. We don't put that kind of pressure on our folks. We're coming out now because a crisis exists, but we need to be active before there's a crisis. You know, in times of peace, prepare for war. In times of feast, prepare for famine. You know, we need to think like that and have it something that goes on all the time, not just in times of crisis, not just when somebody gets killed and then we all come out and we're all upset. We should understand that that does not work and it doesn't hold much weight. And the reason that a lot of our people are going to lose attention span is because that's how we operate. Until we are more consistent and make that a part of our life activity, you know, we're going to continue to see this thing go up and up and up and up. So I think that we need to actually, you know, put more pressure on our friends who are politicians also. That's something else I've seen. People, we elect them, leave them to themselves, and then we expect them to do whatever. Well, it's not that simple.
And most of these cities where we're seeing police violence are, you know, in urban areas run by people who are politically liberal and won office with, you know, significant black support. So excellent point. Well, it's after 4 o'clock. We are over time. Let me give you both just 30 seconds each to wrap it up, inshallah. We didn't really discuss, we wanted to obviously discuss the intersection of our work, our faith-based activism as Muslims with this effort. What as Muslims do we bring to the table in this fight against anti-black racism? If you could just take 30 seconds, anything you want to share on that subject, briefly, inshallah, because we are way over time, and then we'll wrap up, inshallah.
Right. Well, you know, as Muslims, our priority after being obedient to God and His Messenger is to stand for justice, and that is what we as Muslims are obliged to do. And God will hold us to account on the day of judgment if we do not stand for justice. And that is the primary, after God and His Messenger, that is the primary obligation that we have, because God enjoins justice upon us throughout the Quran. And God has destroyed nations because of their injustice. So that should take us, that should give us an ample warning that for all of us as Muslims, it is important for us to stand for justice and assist in that which is just. And there's so much more we can add to that, but I got 30 seconds and I have to leave it. I'll leave the rest to my brother.
Alhamdulillah. That was good, mashallah. Thank you. Brother Mustafa.
All I can say is I mean to what Brother Abdul said, but I'll also add that we need to clean our own house. That, you know, instead of not just be just when we see these things and try to go outside, but we have issues inside our community. And one of the reasons that a lot of our folks are so tone deaf to African-American issues is because we don't practice it internally. So I would encourage everyone to practice what we preach. You know, charity begins at home and spreads abroad. So inshallah, I hope that's what we'll do.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair. And I know that many masajid organizations are taking a look at what they can do internally to address racial diversity, anti-Black racism in the masajid and their families. Part of the task force CARE is established. One of our committees is focused on developing ideas, recommendations for masajid and other Islamic organizations for things that we can do internally to strengthen our commitment to reflecting the diversity of the Muslim community, first and foremost within CARE. Before we even talk to anyone else, first and foremost, what can we as an organization do internally to continue to foster and reflect the diversity of our community? Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. If we said anything positive, alhamdulillah, may Allah accept. Anything bad, may Allah forgive us. And may Allah guide us to be productive in his cause, fighting against injustice, whether it be racism or other forms of evil. Good to see both of you brothers. Hopefully, inshallah, we get to see you in person when things are safer. May Allah allow us to reunite safely and securely soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching today's episode of The Daily Dose. Next week, inshallah, we will be shifting and transitioning and transforming this program. As you know, we founded this program at the height of the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. The title of the show is The Daily Dose COVID Conversations with CARE. Although the pandemic is clearly still ongoing and it's clearly still a threat, may Allah protect all of us, we have gotten to the point where, you know, we need to start addressing topics that go beyond just COVID-19. And you've seen that in the programs we've been doing over the past several weeks. So inshallah, we are going to launch a new program next week. The program is called CARE on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. Inshallah, that will air on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. And Thursdays at 3 p.m. inshallah. Twice a week show at 3 o'clock. CARE on Air, the Muslim Action Hour, and we will be addressing topical issues, whatever issues related to Islamophobia, civil rights, other issues of justice that come up that week, but also highlighting the work that CARE is doing to address those issues and bring on some special guests who can help us highlight that work inside and outside of CARE, inside and outside of the Muslim community, inshallah. So we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 3 o'clock for the first episode of our new program, the Muslim Action CARE on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. And we thank you so much for watching The Daily Dose. Anything positive that came of this program over the past 2 months or so, alhamdulillah, may Allah accept it from us. Anything bad, may Allah forgive us and blot it out from us. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.